The film Oblivion, released in 2013, is driven by a compact but highly experienced ensemble cast led by Tom Cruise. The film relies heavily on its actors to carry a story that is emotionally restrained, visually expansive, and built around themes of identity, memory, and isolation. Each principal performer brought a distinct professional background into production, and their previous work strongly shaped the way their characters were realized on screen. At the center of the film is Tom Cruise, who plays Jack Harper, a technician stationed on a post-apocalyptic Earth. By the time Oblivion was produced, Cruise was already one of the most established global movie stars in modern cinema. His career had spanned decades, beginning with breakthrough roles in the early 1980s in films like Risky Business and Top Gun, which established his charismatic screen presence and ability to carry major studio productions. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, Cruise expanded his range with dramatic performances in films such as Jerry Maguire and Magnolia, while also becoming a defining figure in action cinema through the Mission Impossible franchise. In Oblivion, Cruise brings a controlled, introspective variation of his usual screen persona. Rather than relying on high-intensity action alone, he plays a character defined by repetition, routine, and subtle emotional uncertainty. His experience in physically demanding roles, particularly in science fiction and action-driven environments, such as Minority Report and War of the Worlds, made him especially suited for the futuristic isolation of Oblivion. What he contributes to the role is a sense of familiarity, layered with quiet disorientation, which aligns with the film's themes of memory manipulation and identity confusion. While the film did not drastically alter the trajectory of his career, it reinforced his continued dominance in large-scale science fiction and action storytelling during the 2010s. Opposite Cruise is Olga Kurylenko, who portrays Julia Ruzakova, a mysterious woman connected to Jack's fragmented memories. Kurylenko had previously gained international recognition for her role in Quantum of Solace, where she played a Bond film character known for emotional complexity within a high-stakes narrative. Her earlier career included modeling work and European cinema roles before transitioning into Hollywood productions. In Oblivion, she is tasked with embodying both vulnerability and narrative ambiguity, serving as an emotional anchor while also functioning as a catalyst of the story's central mystery. Her performance draws on her experience in portraying emotionally layered characters who exist within action-heavy environments. While Oblivion did not fundamentally redefine her career, it contributed to her ongoing presence in science fiction and action genres, reinforcing her ability to balance emotional subtlety with genre-driven storytelling. The role also positioned her within a recurring cinematic space occupied by female leads who challenge the protagonist's understanding of reality. Andrea Riseborough plays Victoria Olsen, a communication officer and partner to Jack in the isolated tower where much of the film begins. Riseborough came into Oblivion with a strong background in independent films and critically acclaimed performances in projects such as Brighton Rock and Never Let Me Go. Her acting style is often characterized by emotional restraint and psychological depth, which fits the controlled and structured environment of the film's opening act. In Oblivion, her character represents stability, routine, and institutional loyalty, which contrasts with the growing uncertainty experienced by Jack. Riseborough's performance is subtle but essential in establishing the emotional rigidity of the world before its underlying truth is revealed. Following Oblivion, she continued to build a reputation as a versatile actress capable of moving between independent cinema and larger productions, eventually gaining further recognition in awards circuits for later performances in other films. Her role in Oblivion contributed to her visibility in mainstream science fiction without overshadowing her independent film identity. Morgan Freeman plays Beach, the leader of a surviving human resistance group. Freeman, by this point in his career, was already considered one of the most respected and recognizable actors in global cinema. His body of work included acclaimed performances in films such as The Shawshank Redemption, Say Seven, Million Dollar Baby, and numerous other major productions. Freeman's voice, presence, and authoritative screen persona often position him as a figure of wisdom or moral clarity within narratives. In Oblivion, his role is somewhat reduced in screen time compared to his prominence in the industry, but his presence carries significant narrative weight. He embodies resistance, truth, and grounded human resilience in contrast to the technologically controlled environment above ground. Freeman's participation adds gravitas to the film's later acts, reinforcing the idea of hidden truth and human survival. While the film did not significantly alter his already established legacy, it added another entry to his long history of science fiction and fantasy roles. Nikolai Coster-Waldau plays Sykes, a member of the resistance group who initially appears skeptical and antagonistic toward Jack. Before Oblivion, Coster-Waldau was steadily building his international career through both European cinema and Hollywood films, but his global breakthrough would come shortly after through his role as Jaime Lannister in the television series Game of Thrones. At the time of filming Oblivion, he was still transitioning into widespread international recognition. His performance in Oblivion demonstrates his ability to portray tension, guarded trust, and controlled aggression. The character of Sykes requires a balance between suspicion and eventual alignment with the truth, and Coster-Waldau delivers this with restrained intensity. Although the film itself did not serve as his breakout moment, it contributed to his growing Hollywood visibility just before his career reached a global peak through television. Oblivion arrived in 2013 during a period when science fiction cinema was experiencing a strong resurgence. Audiences were seeing a renewed interest in futuristic Earth settings, post-apocalyptic survival stories, and high-concept narratives centered on identity, simulation, and memory. Films like Inception, Prometheus, and Elysium had already begun shaping audience expectations for visually ambitious science fiction that blended philosophical questions with blockbuster scale. Within this context, Oblivion positioned itself as a visually polished, contemplative entry that emphasized atmosphere and mystery over fast-paced spectacle. One of the key cultural impacts of Oblivion lies in its aesthetic influence. The film presented a clean, minimalist vision of a post-apocalyptic Earth that was visually striking and distinct from the traditionally dark and ruined landscapes often used in similar stories. Instead of focusing on chaotic destruction, it portrayed an almost sterile, quiet planet filled with architectural remnants and vast open spaces. This design approach contributed to a broader trend in science fiction visuals during the 2010s, where filmmakers explored beautiful dystopias rather than purely grim environments. The sleek design of the Sky Tower, the advanced aircraft, and the uniform technological interfaces influenced later productions in both film and television that sought a polished futuristic aesthetic. The film also contributed to ongoing cultural fascination with identity manipulation and simulated reality. Although it did not originate these ideas, it reinforced them during a time when audiences were increasingly interested in narratives questioning what is real and what is constructed. This thematic interest was reflected across multiple media forms during the decade, including video games, television series, and novels that explored similar philosophical territory. Oblivion became part of a wider cultural conversation about memory, control systems, and artificial environments, even if it did not become the defining entry in that conversation. In terms of pop culture presence, Oblivion did not generate a large volume of memes or long-lasting internet humor, compared to other science fiction films of its era. However, its imagery, particularly the drone designs and the white uniform aesthetic of Jack Harper, became recognizable within science fiction fan communities. The drone technology, with its smooth spherical design and scanning capabilities, was frequently referenced in discussions about futuristic surveillance systems and autonomous machines. These design elements influenced conceptual discussions around artificial intelligence and drone warfare in popular culture, especially as real-world drone technology became more prominent in the 2010s. The film's depiction of a controlled, monitored Earth also resonated with broader societal concerns about surveillance and centralized control systems. While Oblivion is not a political film in a direct sense, its narrative of hidden truth and manipulated reality echoed public anxieties about information control, data privacy, and institutional authority. During the early 2010s, global conversations around digital surveillance and data collection were becoming increasingly prominent, and science fiction narratives like Oblivion reflected these underlying cultural tensions in abstract form. The idea that an advanced system could reshape human perception of reality aligned with growing awareness of how technology mediates everyday life. Historically, Oblivion also represents an important phase in the career of Tom Cruise as a science fiction leading actor in the post-Mission Impossible era. While Cruise had already established himself in the genre through earlier films like Minority Report and War of the Worlds, Oblivion reinforces continued relevance in high-concept science fiction at a time when the genre was evolving rapidly. His involvement helped anchor the film within mainstream blockbuster culture, ensuring it reached a wide global audience, even though its narrative style was more subdued than typical action-heavy releases. The film also reflects a transitional moment in Hollywood visual effects storytelling. It combined large-scale digital environments with practical location shooting in a way that emphasized realism within a futuristic framework. The production contributed to the industry's increasing reliance on hybrid filming techniques, where real landscapes were digitally transformed into alien or post-apocalyptic settings. This approach influenced how later science fiction films and streaming productions would balance cost efficiency with visual ambition. In the broader historical timeline of science fiction cinema, Oblivion is often categorized as part of a wave of reflective, atmospheric science fiction films that prioritize mood and conceptual storytelling over franchise expansion. Unlike many blockbuster films of the 2010s, it did not spawn sequels or expand into a larger cinematic universe. Instead, it stands as a self-contained narrative, which in itself is culturally significant in an era increasingly dominated by interconnected franchises. Its independence from sequels gives a more classical science fiction identity, closer to mid-20th century speculative films that focus on single, complete ideas. Internationally, the film contributed to the globalization of science fiction aesthetics. Its production design, visual language, and casting choices were aimed at global audiences rather than strictly domestic ones. This reflects a broader trend in Hollywood during the 2010s, where science fiction became one of the most internationally marketable genres. Oblivion was distributed widely and performed particularly well in overseas markets, reinforcing the idea that visually driven science fiction could transcend language barriers and cultural differences. The production of Oblivion was a large-scale undertaking that combined practical location shooting with extensive digital world building. Directed by Joseph Kosinski, the film reflects his background in architecture and design, which strongly influenced the film's clean visual style and structured futuristic environments. Kosinski had previously directed Tron Legacy, and Oblivion became his second major feature film, further establishing his reputation for highly controlled visual storytelling and precise world construction. One of the most important behind-the-scenes elements of Oblivion was its commitment to shooting in real, physically grounded locations rather than relying entirely on green screen environments. A significant portion of the film was shot in Iceland, which provided vast, volcanic, and barren landscapes that represent the post-apocalyptic Earth. These locations included lava fields, black sand beaches, and expansive rocky terrain that naturally resembled an alien world. Shooting in Iceland gave the film a sense of authenticity and scale that would have been difficult to replicate digitally at the time. The production also filmed in other natural environments and constructed large-scale sets for interior sequences, particularly the Sky Tower, which served as Jack Harper's base of operations. The Sky Tower itself was one of the most ambitious set designs in the film. It was built as a full physical interior set with clean, minimalist architecture, large glass surfaces, and integrated lighting systems. The design was intended to reflect isolation, control, and technological perfection. The production design team focused on creating an environment that felt both futuristic and emotionally detached, reinforcing the psychological tone of the story. The circular bed, floating holographic interfaces, and symmetrical layout all contributed to the sense of a sterile, controlled existence. Tom Cruise was heavily involved in the physical aspect of filming, performing many of his own stunts, as he is known for throughout his career. Even in a science fiction environment dominated by visual effects, Cruise insisted on practical engagement with physical sequences. This included complex wire work, harness-based aerial shots, and physically demanding movement across rugged terrain. His commitment to realism helped ground the film's futuristic world in tangible physical performance, which is a hallmark of many of his productions. Olga Kurylenko and Andrea Riseborough also worked within physically demanding set environments that required interaction with both practical and digital elements. Many scenes were filmed on partially constructed sets that were later extended using computer-generated imagery. This required actors to perform in environments where portions of their surroundings would not be visible during filming, demanding precise spatial awareness and continuity in performance. The drones, which serve as both protective and antagonistic machines in the film, were created through a combination of practical props and advanced visual effects. Physical drone models were used on set for lighting reference and actor interaction, while the final versions were fully realized through digital animation. The design process for the drones went through multiple iterations to achieve a balance between mechanical realism and unsettling movement. Their smooth spherical design was intentionally chosen to avoid traditional robotic shapes, making them feel more alien and unpredictable. Visual effects were handled by several major studios working together, with a focus on integrating digital environments seamlessly into real footage. The film relied heavily on matte painting techniques, 3D environment extensions, and digital compositing. One of the key challenges was blending the real Icelandic landscapes with futuristic architecture and atmospheric effects, such as clouds, light diffusion, and debris. The goal was to maintain a consistent visual tone that never broke the illusion of a single coherent world. Sound stages were used extensively for interior sequences, especially for scenes involving the Sky Tower and mission control systems. These controlled environments allowed for precise lighting setups that matched the film's aesthetic emphasis on white, reflective surfaces and high-contrast illumination. The production design emphasized minimalism to ensure that the audience's attention remained focused on character movement and narrative tension rather than cluttered backgrounds. The director Joseph Kosinski worked closely with cinematographer Claudio Miranda, who brought a strong background in visually rich and atmospheric filmmaking. Their collaboration focused on creating a consistent visual language based on symmetry, wide framing, and smooth camera movement. The camera work often uses slow tracking shots and floating perspectives, reinforcing the film's themes of observation and control. Miranda's experience with digital cinematography helped bridge the gap between real and virtual environments. One of the notable behind-the-scenes challenges was maintaining narrative clarity while preserving the film's mystery structure. The story intentionally withholds key information about Earth, humanity, and Jack Harper's identity, which required careful editing decisions. The filmmakers had to balance exposition with ambiguity, ensuring that audiences remain engaged without revealing critical plot twists too early. Another production challenge involved the integration of the musical score with the visual design. The music was often used during editing to shape pacing and emotional tone, and in some cases scenes were built around musical cues rather than dialogue. This approach contributed to the film's meditative rhythm and slow, unfolding narrative structure. The production also made extensive use of aerial filming techniques, including helicopter shots over Icelandic terrain. These shots were designed to emphasize the scale and emptiness of the post-apocalyptic world. The contrast between massive natural landscapes and small human figures reinforces the themes of isolation and insignificance in a vast reconstructed environment. Costume design was another carefully controlled aspect of production. The white flight suits worn by Jack Harper and Victoria were designed to reflect purity, uniformity, and technological integration. The costumes were also functional, designed to accommodate harness work, stunts, and extended outdoor filming in harsh weather conditions. Their minimalist design contributed to the overall aesthetic of a sanitized future. Oblivion presents a science fiction narrative built around controlled memory, reconstructed reality, and gradual revelation. The film is structured in a way that initially feels simple and procedural, but steadily transforms into a layered mystery that redefines everything the audience has been shown. Its narrative design relies heavily on controlled information release, meaning the viewer experiences the same confusion and discovery process as the main character, Jack Harper. The story begins in the year 2077, on a devastated Earth that has been largely abandoned by humanity after a catastrophic war with alien invaders known as the Scavengers. Jack Harper and Victoria Olsen are stationed on Earth as part of a cleanup and resource extraction operation. Their mission is to maintain massive water harvesting machines that convert Earth's ocean resources into energy for the remaining human population living on a distant moon of Saturn called Titan. From the beginning, the narrative establishes a routine-based existence. Jack and Victoria live in a high-tech sky tower above the clouds, and Jack regularly travels to the surface to repair drones that protect the extraction equipment from remaining hostile forces. The early structure of the film is deliberately repetitive. Jack's daily routine includes flying across ruined landscapes, repairing machines, and avoiding hostile encounters with the Scavengers. These sequences are designed to establish both the visual world and the psychological condition of the protagonist. He experiences recurring dreams and fragmented memories of a life he does not fully understand, particularly involving a woman named Julia. These visions create the first narrative tension, suggesting that Jack's understanding of reality is incomplete. A key turning point occurs when Jack discovers a crashed spacecraft containing frozen human survivors, including Julia. This discovery disrupts the established narrative that humanity has already relocated and that Earth is uninhabitable for human life. Julia's arrival introduces emotional complexity and challenges Jack's loyalty to his mission and to the system he serves. Her presence also acts as a trigger for his suppressed memories, accelerating his psychological awakening. As the story progresses, Jack begins to question the authority of the voice guiding him, known as Sally, and the organization behind the mission. The narrative structure shifts from procedural science fiction into a controlled psychological unraveling. Jack's encounters with the resistance group led by Beach further destabilize his understanding of reality. Initially, these survivors appear to be remnants of a hostile force, but gradually they're revealed to be the true surviving humans on Earth. The central narrative twist is revealed in stages rather than a single moment. Jack is not who he believes he is. He is actually one of many clones created by an alien artificial intelligence known as the Tet. These clones are deployed to Earth to maintain systems that harvest resources and eliminate any surviving humans. The memories Jack experiences are not entirely his own, but are implanted fragments from a captured original human identity. This revelation recontextualizes every earlier scene, transforming routine missions into acts of unconscious complicity in a larger system of control. The narrative structure uses this twist to retroactively reinterpret character relationships. Victoria, who initially appears to be Jack's partner in isolation, is revealed to be part of the same control system, tasked with maintaining operational stability and ensuring compliance. Her emotional restraint and adherence to protocol gain new meaning in this context, shifting from personality traits to program behavior within a controlled environment. The second half of the film transitions into a resistance narrative. Jack aligns himself with the surviving humans and begins to actively oppose the system he once served. This shift marks a transition from passive discovery to active rebellion. The pacing becomes more dynamic as the narrative moves toward confrontation with the controlling intelligence. The climax of the film centers on Jack's final confrontation with the Tet system and its controlling presence, represented through Sally. The structure of this final sequence blends physical action with philosophical resolution. Jack sacrifices himself in a final effort to destroy the controlling entity, but due to the nature of the clone system, multiple versions of Jack exist. This allows the narrative to conclude with the idea that identity can persist even after individual destruction. The ending shows a version of Jack living with Julia and raising a family, suggesting that the human identity he recovered has outlasted the system that attempted to suppress it. This conclusion is intentionally ambiguous, as it raises questions about continuity of self, memory authenticity, and whether identity is defined by origin or experience. Oblivion is built around a set of tightly interconnected themes that explore identity, memory, control, and what it means to be human in a technologically dominated environment. While the film operates as a science fiction action narrative on the surface, its deeper structure is philosophical, using futuristic concepts to examine very human questions about self-awareness, truth, and autonomy. One of the most central themes is identity under manipulation. Jack Harper believes he is a human technician performing a necessary task for the survival of humanity. However, the revelation that he is a clone being created by an artificial intelligence system fundamentally reframes this identity. The film uses this twist not simply as a plot device, but as a symbolic question about whether identity is defined by origin or by lived experience. Jack's journey suggests that identity is not fixed at creation, but constructed through memory, emotion, and choice. Even though his memories are partially fabricated, his emotional responses and moral decisions are genuine within his subjective experience. Memory is another dominant theme, closely tied to identity. The film repeatedly shows Jack experiencing fragmented visions of a past life with Julia. These memories are not reliable historical records, but engineered impressions designed to control or guide behavior. This raises a question of whether memory is a foundation of truth or simply a narrative we are given to organize experience. The manipulation of memory by the TET system reflects a broader philosophical concern about how institutions or technologies can shape perception by controlling information. In this sense, memory becomes both a weapon and a prison. Isolation is also a key thematic element. Jack and Victoria live above the clouds in a highly controlled environment, physically separated from the ruined surface of Earth. This separation creates not only physical isolation, but emotional detachment. Their lives are structured, repetitive, and carefully monitored. The sterile environment of their sky dwelling reinforces the idea that isolation can be engineered. Even when surrounded by another person, Jack experiences a deep psychological loneliness, suggesting that true connection requires truth, not just proximity. The theme of control versus freedom runs throughout the film. The TET system represents absolute control, not just over physical resources, but over perception itself. Humanity is not only defeated physically, but psychologically managed through deception. The drones, surveillance systems, and communication structures all serve to maintain this control. Jack's awakening represents a shift from passive obedience to active awareness. His rebellion is not only against an external enemy, but against the internalized structure of control that defines his existence. Symbolically, the Sky Tower represents artificial order. It is clean, symmetrical, and elevated above the ruined Earth. This elevation suggests superiority and safety, but also detachment from reality. Living above the clouds becomes a metaphor for living above truth. The tower is visually and thematically associated with control, observation, and emotional suppression. Its white interiors reinforce the idea of sterility and constructed purity. In contrast, the surface of Earth symbolizes authenticity, decay, and hidden truth. Although it appears destroyed and dangerous, it is actually the place where real human survivors exist. This inversion of expectation is a key symbolic structure in the film. What appears broken is real, and what appears perfect is artificial. The barren landscapes of Earth function as a metaphor for truth stripped of illusion. They are harsh but honest, in contrast to the controlled environment above. Water also carries symbolic weight in the film. The massive machines that extract Earth's ocean resources represent exploitation and consumption, but water itself is repeatedly associated with memory, life, and continuity. Jack's interactions with natural water sources often coincide with moments of emotional clarity or reflection. This positions water as a transitional element between control and freedom, artificial systems, and natural existence. The drones serve as symbols of automated authority. They are not evil in a human sense, but they represent unquestioning enforcement of a system. Their lack of individuality and reliance on programmed directives makes them extensions of controlling intelligence. In symbolic terms, they represent systems that continue to function without moral evaluation. Their presence raises questions about responsibility in automated environments, where actions are executed without human judgment. Another important symbolic element is duplication. Jack exists as one of many clones, each performing the same function. This introduces the idea of replaceability and the loss of individual uniqueness in a controlled system. However, the film also challenges this idea by showing that each version of Jack develops emotional depth and individuality through experience. The existence of multiple Jacks suggests that identity can be replicated structurally but not spiritually. Even identical origins can lead to divergent selves based on experience and choice. The character of Julia represents emotional authenticity and human connection. She functions as both a literal person and a symbolic anchor for Jack's humanity. Her presence triggers memory recovery and emotional awakening. Symbolically, she represents truth outside of systems, something that cannot be fully controlled or manufactured. Her relationship with Jack becomes a counterforce to the artificial structure of the TET system. The TET itself is one of the most significant symbolic constructs in the film. It is not only an antagonist, but a representation of centralized intelligence and systemic domination. Its geometric design emphasizes perfection, order, and artificiality. The fact that it operates from orbit reinforces its detachment from human experience. It symbolizes a form of intelligence that lacks empathy, functioning purely on efficiency and resource extraction. Oblivion is widely recognized for its highly controlled visual identity, which is one of its most defining artistic achievements. The film's visual style is not just decorative, but deeply integrated into its storytelling. Every framing choice, lighting decision, and color selection reinforces themes of isolation, artificial order, and hidden truth. The overall aesthetic is clean, minimal, and geometric, reflecting a futuristic world that prioritizes efficiency and control over organic imperfection. The cinematography, led by Claudio Miranda, is characterized by wide compositions and carefully balanced symmetry. Many shots are composed with central framing, placing characters directly in the middle of vast environments. This creates a sense of smallness and vulnerability within large, empty spaces. The camera often pulls back to reveal scale, emphasizing how insignificant human figures are within the reconstructed Earth landscape. This visual approach reinforces the theme of isolation and the emotional distance between individuals and their environment. One of the most distinctive visual elements of the film is its color palette. The sky tower environments are dominated by white, gray, and soft metallic tones. These colors create a sterile, almost clinical atmosphere that suggests artificial perfection. The use of bright, reflective surfaces enhances this effect, often causing light to diffuse across the frame in a way that removes harsh contrast. This visual softness contributes to the feeling that the environment is controlled and sanitized. In contrast, the surface of Earth is depicted with earthy browns, volcanic blacks, and muted natural tones. These environments feel more chaotic and organic, but also more authentic. The contrast between the clean architectural spaces above the clouds and the rugged landscapes below creates a visual duality that mirrors the film's central theme of illusion versus reality. The Earth is visually harsher but emotionally more grounded, while the sky environment is visually perfect but emotionally hollow. Lighting plays a crucial role in shaping the film's atmosphere. Natural light is often used in exterior Earth scenes, with strong sunlight and long shadows creating a sense of realism. In the sky tower, lighting is artificial, soft, and evenly distributed. This contrast helps distinguish between natural existence and constructed reality. The lighting design also emphasizes clarity and exposure, often washing out backgrounds to isolate characters within the frame. The film makes extensive use of long, uninterrupted camera movements. Instead of rapid cuts or handheld chaos, the camera often glides smoothly through space, tracking characters as they move through environments. These movements are slow and deliberate, contributing to a meditative pacing. The effect is immersive, allowing the audience to absorb architectural details and spatial relationships within each scene. This approach reflects the influence of architectural visualization, where space is presented as carefully designed and experienced rather than quickly consumed. Aerial cinematography is another defining feature of the film. Sweeping shots over Icelandic landscapes establish the scale of the post-apocalyptic Earth. These shots often show vast, empty plains, mountain ranges, and volcanic formations stretching into the distance. The camera movement in these sequences is fluid and almost weightless, reinforcing the sense of an uninhabited world. These aerial perspectives also serve a narrative function, showing the operational scale of the machines and drones that maintain control over the environment. The design of the sky tower interior is one of the most visually significant achievements of the film. It is structured around circular and geometric forms, with an emphasis on symmetry and openness. Large glass panels allow constant visibility of the outside world, but this transparency is deceptive, as the environment is still controlled and isolated. The circular bed, floating screens, and minimalist furniture all contribute to a sense of futuristic luxury that feels emotionally empty rather than comforting. The use of negative space is a consistent visual strategy throughout the film. Characters are often positioned within large, empty areas of the frame, with significant distance between them and surrounding objects. This creates visual silence and reinforces emotional isolation. The emptiness is not accidental, but carefully designed to emphasize the psychological state of the characters and the desolation of the world they inhabit. Special effects are integrated in a way that prioritizes realism over spectacle. Instead of drawing attention to themselves, visual effects are blended seamlessly into live-action footage. Digital extensions of landscapes, skies, and structures are designed to feel physically consistent with real environments. This subtle integration helps maintain immersion and prevents the film from feeling overly artificial despite its heavy use of CGI. The The drones are a particularly important visual element. Their spherical design is smooth, reflective, and almost organic in motion, despite being mechanical. Their movement is precise and fluid, often contrasting with the rough terrain and chaotic environments they navigate. The visual language of the drones communicates authority and surveillance. Their glowing lights and scanning beams create a sense of constant observation, reinforcing themes of control. Camera lenses and framing choices often emphasize depth and layering. Foreground, midground, and background elements are carefully arranged to create spatial complexity within each shot. This layering enhances realism and allows the viewer to feel embedded within the environment. It also contributes to the film's slow reveal structure, as important details are often placed in the background before becoming narratively significant later. Another notable aspect of the cinematography is the restrained use of close-ups. Instead of frequently cutting to tight emotional shots, the film often keeps characters at medium or wide distance. This choice prevents emotional overemphasis and maintains a sense of detachment. When close-ups are used, they are impactful and usually occur during moments of emotional or narrative revelation. The soundtrack and sound design of Oblivion play a fundamental role in shaping its emotional identity and immersive atmosphere. Unlike many science fiction films that rely heavily on constant musical cues or aggressive soundscapes, Oblivion takes a more restrained and atmospheric approach. The audio design is built to reinforce isolation, emotional distance, and gradual revelation, mirroring the film's visual and narrative structure. The musical score was composed by Anthony Gonzalez, known for his work under the electronic music project M83. His involvement is significant because his style is deeply rooted in ambient textures, emotional synth layers, and expansive sonic landscapes. This made him an ideal choice for a film that emphasizes mood and introspection over fast-paced action intensity. The score blends electronic music with orchestral elements, creating a hybrid sound that feels both futuristic and emotionally nostalgic. One of the defining characteristics of the soundtrack is its use of expansive, reverberating sound layers. Many tracks are built around sustained synth pads that gradually evolve rather than shifting abruptly. This creates a sense of emotional continuity across scenes, allowing transitions to feel smooth and atmospheric. The music often feels less like background accompaniment and more like an emotional environment that surrounds the viewer. The main musical themes are heavily associated with memory, longing, and identity. These themes are reflected in recurring melodic structures that appear throughout the film in different variations. Rather than using distinct character motifs in a traditional sense, the score focuses on emotional states. This allows the music to remain flexible and interpretive, adapting to different narrative contexts while maintaining a consistent emotional tone. Silence is also an essential component of the film's sound design. Many sequences, particularly those set on the surface of Earth, are deliberately quiet or filled only with environmental sounds. Wind, distant mechanical hums, and subtle atmospheric noise dominate these moments. This use of silence enhances the feeling of isolation and makes the environment feel vast and empty. It also creates contrast with more emotionally intense or action-driven sequences, making those moments feel more impactful when they occur. The sound design of the drones is particularly important. Their presence is communicated through mechanical whirs, electronic pulses, and scanning tones that feel precise and clinical. These sounds are designed to evoke both technological sophistication and emotional detachment. The drones do not sound aggressive in a traditional sense. Instead, they sound efficient and unfeeling, reinforcing their role as extensions of a controlling system rather than autonomous emotional beings. Aircraft and flight sequences also feature carefully crafted audio layers. The sound of propulsion is smooth and controlled rather than explosive or chaotic. This reinforces the film's aesthetic of clean, futuristic technology. The transition between silence and open air and the subtle hum of advanced machinery helps create a sense of weightless movement. The audio design makes flight feel elegant and almost effortless, even during moments of tension or danger. Inside the Sky Tower, the sound environment is notably different. It is characterized by controlled ambient hums, soft electronic tones, and minimal echo. The acoustics feel artificially regulated, as if the environment itself is designed to suppress unpredictability. Even footsteps and movement sounds are softened, contributing to the sense that everything within the structure is carefully managed. This contrasts sharply with the more natural and unpredictable soundscape of Earth's surface. Dialogue is intentionally sparse in many sections of the film, allowing the sound design and music to carry emotional weight. When characters do speak, their voices are often recorded with a clean, slightly distant clarity that matches the sterile environments they inhabit. This vocal treatment reduces intimacy at first, reinforcing emotional detachment between characters. As the narrative progresses and emotional stakes increase, the relationship between music and silence becomes more dynamic. The score becomes more prominent during moments of revelation or emotional awakening, particularly as Jack begins to recover fragments of his true identity. In these moments, the music shifts from ambient background texture to more structured melodic expression, signaling internal transformation. The climactic sequences of the film combine intense sound layering with controlled restraint. Rather than overwhelming the audience with constant noise, the sound design alternates between moments of explosive mechanical activity and sudden quiet. This contrast heightens tension and allows key moments to resonate more strongly. The final confrontation scenes use sound to emphasize scale rather than chaos, making the environment feel vast and technologically overwhelming. Another notable aspect of the sound design is its integration with visual rhythm. Many sequences are edited in synchronization with musical pacing rather than dialogue-driven timing. This creates a cinematic flow where audio and visuals feel tightly interconnected. The rhythm of the score often dictates the emotional pacing of scenes, particularly in travel sequences and introspective moments. Environmental audio also plays a symbolic role. The wind on Earth, the distant rumble of machines, and the echo of empty landscapes all contribute to the sense of a world that is alive but depopulated. These sounds reinforce the idea that Earth is not dead, but simply emptied of human presence. This subtle distinction is important to the film's emotional tone. When Oblivion was released in 2013, it received a mix of moderately positive reception from critics, while audiences responded more favorably, particularly appreciating its visual design, atmosphere, and Tom Cruise's central performance. The film occupied an interesting space in science fiction cinema, where its technical execution was widely praised, but its narrative familiarity and emotional restraint divided opinion. Critics generally agreed that Oblivion was visually impressive. The cinematography, production design, and world building were frequently highlighted as its strongest elements. Many reviews noted the film's clean, minimalist aesthetic and its ability to create a believable post-apocalyptic environment that felt both expansive and controlled. The Icelandic landscapes, futuristic architecture, and drone design were often cited as standout achievements. In this regard, the film was seen as a strong example of modern science fiction visual craftsmanship. Tom Cruise's performance was another consistently praised element. Critics acknowledged his ability to carry the film's emotional and narrative weight, even when the script leaned heavily on mystery and exposition. His portrayal of controlled, gradually awakening character was seen as effective, particularly in the early and mid-sections of the film where subtlety was required. While some critics felt the character lacked deeper emotional complexity in certain moments, Cruise's presence was widely considered essential to the film's success. However, one of the most common criticisms of Oblivion was its reliance on familiar science fiction tropes. Many reviewers pointed out that the film drew heavily from earlier works in the genre, particularly in its themes of memory manipulation, dystopian control systems, and identity revelation. Because of this, some critics felt that the film did not introduce enough new ideas to stand out within the broader science fiction landscape. The narrative twist, while effective in execution, was also considered somewhat predictable by viewers familiar with the genre. The pacing of the film was another point of division. Some audiences appreciated the slow, atmospheric build-up in the first half, which allowed for immersion in the world and character routines. Others found this section overly repetitive and lacking in narrative momentum. The film's deliberate pacing was intended to reinforce isolation and routine, but it did not appeal equally to all viewers, particularly those expecting a more action-driven structure. The screenplay received mixed responses as well. While the structure and concept were praised, some critics felt that dialogue was minimal and occasionally functional rather than deeply expressive. The emphasis on visual storytelling meant that emotional exposition was often understated, which worked for some viewers but left others wanting more character depth and interpersonal development. Despite these criticisms, Oblivion performed reasonably well at the global box office. Its international appeal was strong, driven by its visual spectacle and star power. The film's clean, futuristic aesthetic and science fiction premise translated effectively across different markets, contributing to solid worldwide earnings even if domestic reception was more tempered. This international success reinforced the idea that visually driven science fiction films could perform strongly even without universal critical acclaim. Audience reactions tended to be more positive than critical reviews. Many viewers appreciated the film's immersive atmosphere and its sense of mystery. The combination of action, science fiction concepts, and emotional undertones resonated with audiences looking for a visually engaging cinematic experience. The twist involving Jack's identity and the true nature of the TET system was often cited as a highlight, even as some viewers had anticipated elements of the reveal. Over time, the film has developed a somewhat more favorable reassessment among certain science fiction fans. While it is not generally considered a genre-defining masterpiece, it is often recognized as a strong example of mid-budget to large-scale original science fiction storytelling in an era increasingly dominated by franchises and sequels. This retrospective appreciation is largely based on its visual ambition and self-contained narrative structure. In terms of awards and formal recognition, Oblivion did not receive major awards attention in major categories, such as acting or screenplay. However, it did receive recognition in technical areas, particularly visual effects and production design-related discussions. Its achievements were more often acknowledged within industry circles and design communities rather than mainstream award ceremonies. One of the subtle controversies surrounding the film was its perceived similarity to earlier science fiction works. Some critics and viewers noted thematic and visual parallels to other films that explore memory loss, artificial environments, and identity manipulation. While these similarities did not lead to any formal disputes, they contributed to perception that Oblivion was more derivative than innovative. Although Oblivion was not positioned as a franchise-starting blockbuster or a genre-redefining milestone, it has developed a steady legacy within modern science fiction cinema due to its visual identity, production approach, and thematic alignment with early 2010 sci-fi trends. Its influence is less about direct imitation in major blockbuster storytelling and more about subtle aesthetic and conceptual echoes that can be seen across later films, streaming productions, and even video game design. One of the most important aspects of its legacy is its contribution to the clean dystopia visual trend. Prior to Oblivion, many post-apocalyptic films leaned heavily into gritty, destroyed, and chaotic imagery. Oblivion helped popularize a more polished version of dystopia, where destruction is framed through beauty, symmetry, and silence rather than constant ruin and chaos. This approach influenced later visual storytelling in science fiction, where abandoned or controlled worlds are depicted with a sense of architectural elegance rather than purely decayed environments. The idea that a broken world could still look visually pristine became more common in concept art, cinematic design, and game environments after its release. The film also reinforced the cinematic use of Iceland and similar natural landscapes as stand-ins for alien or post-apocalyptic Earth settings. While Iceland had already been used in major productions before Oblivion, the film helped solidify its reputation as a go-to filming location for futuristic or desolate Earth environments. The combination of volcanic terrain, vast open spaces, and minimal human infrastructure made it a recurring choice in later productions seeking similar visual authenticity. This contributed to a broader industry pattern where real-world extreme landscapes are heavily integrated into science fiction world building. In terms of thematic influence, Oblivion contributed to the continued popularity of science fiction narratives centered on identity uncertainty, simulated reality, and memory manipulation. While it did not originate these ideas, it helped sustain their relevance in mainstream cinema during a period when audiences were increasingly drawn to philosophical science fiction. Later films and series exploring artificial intelligence, human cloning, and reality distortion continue to operate within thematic territory that Oblivion helped keep visible in popular culture. The film's drone design also had a subtle influence on visual language in science fiction media. The spherical, silent, highly mobile drone concept became part of a broader design vocabulary for autonomous surveillance machines. While not directly copied, similar design principles can be seen in later films, television shows, and even conceptual military technology presentations, where smooth, minimal, non-anthropomorphic designs are used to evoke efficiency and emotional detachment. Oblivion helped reinforce the idea that futuristic machines do not need humanoid shapes to feel threatening or intelligent. From a filmmaking perspective, Oblivion contributed to the continued evolution of digitally integrated practical filmmaking. Its blend of real landscapes, constructed sets, and digital extensions became a reference point for how to maintain visual realism in heavily CGI-dependent films. Directors and visual effects teams studying hybrid production methods often point to films like Oblivion as examples of balancing physical authenticity with digital enhancement. This approach has become even more standard in streaming-era productions, where budget and time constraints demand efficient blending of real and virtual environments. The film also played a role in reinforcing Tom Cruise's modern identity as a science fiction and high-concept action anchor. While he was already established in this space, Oblivion helped maintain his presence in original science fiction films outside of established franchises like Mission Impossible. This contributed to his reputation as one of the few major stars capable of carrying visually complex, concept-driven films that are not necessarily tied to existing intellectual properties. His continued involvement in science fiction projects helped keep original high-concept films viable in mainstream Hollywood during a time of increasing franchise dominance. In broader cultural terms, Oblivion has achieved a kind of visual reference status. Even people who do not recall the story in detail often recognize its imagery, particularly the white sky tower interiors, the aircraft designs, and the barren Icelandic landscapes. This visual memorability has helped the film maintain a presence in design discussions, film analysis communities, and science fiction retrospectives. The film's legacy is also tied to its place in the transitional phase of early 2010 science fiction cinema. It sits between a more grounded analog-influenced sci-fi of the 2000s and increasingly digital, franchise-driven science fiction that followed later in the decade. In this sense, Oblivion represents a midpoint where original ideas, high production value, and philosophical storytelling still had space within mainstream studio filmmaking before franchise universes became even more dominant. In academic and analytical discussions, Oblivion is often used as an example of visual storytelling prioritization. It demonstrates how narrative clarity can sometimes be secondary to atmosphere and thematic immersion. Film students and critics examining modern science fiction often reference it when discussing the balance between concept, aesthetics, and accessibility. Its clear structure and strong visual identity make it useful for studying how mood-driven cinema operates within commercial frameworks. Another aspect of its influence can be seen in video game environments, particularly in science fiction and exploration-based games. The combination of vast empty landscapes, minimalist architecture, and controlled technological spaces aligns closely with design trends in modern gaming. While not a direct source of adaptation, its aesthetic language fits into a shared visual ecosystem that influences how futuristic worlds are constructed across media. Audience reactions to Oblivion were shaped by a mixture of expectation, surprise, and gradual reassessment over time. When the film first released, many viewers approached it as a traditional Tom Cruise science fiction action film, expecting fast pacing, frequent set pieces, and a more straightforward narrative structure. Instead, they encountered a slower, more atmospheric film that emphasized mystery, visual immersion, and psychological unfolding. This difference in expectation played a major role in how audiences initially interpreted the movie. For many viewers, the early portion of the film created a sense of curiosity, but also impatience. The repetitive structure of Jack Harper's daily routine, while intentional from a storytelling perspective, led some audiences to feel that the film was deliberately withholding too much information. However, other viewers interpreted the same structure as immersive world building, appreciating the way the film allowed them to experience the monotony and isolation of the protagonist's existence. This split reaction became one of the defining features of audience discussion around the film. As the narrative progressed and key revelations emerged, audience engagement typically increased. The introduction of Julia and the discovery of surviving humans on Earth created a shift in emotional tone that recontextualized earlier scenes. Many viewers reported that the second half of the film retroactively improved their perception of the first half, as earlier confusion transformed into narrative setup. This delayed payoff structure became a key point of discussion in audience interpretation, with some praising it as effective storytelling, and others viewing it as overly delayed exposition. The major twist involving Jack's identity as a clone being created by an artificial intelligence system had a strong emotional and intellectual impact on audiences. For some viewers, this revelation successfully redefined the entire story, encouraging them to reconsider character motivations, dialogue, and visual cues from earlier scenes. It created a sense of rewatch value, as the film encouraged reinterpretation after knowing the truth. For others, the twist was seen as familiar within the science fiction genre, reducing its impact due to perceived similarities with earlier films exploring identity manipulation and artificial realities. Despite mixed initial reactions, one consistent element in audience feedback was appreciation for the film's visual experience. Many viewers describe Oblivion as immersive and visually captivating, even when they were less engaged with the narrative complexity. The expansive landscapes, futuristic technology, and clean architectural environments left a strong impression. This visual strength contributed significantly to the film's long-term positive perception, especially among science fiction fans who prioritize aesthetic world building. Over time, audience interpretation of Oblivion has evolved. In the years following its release, some viewers have become more favorable toward the film, particularly as streaming platforms made it easier to revisit and reanalyze. With repeated viewing, many audiences report a greater appreciation for its thematic coherence and visual storytelling. The slower pacing, once seen as a weakness, is increasingly interpreted by some as a deliberate stylistic choice that emphasizes mood and psychological immersion rather than constant action. Different generations of viewers also interpret the film in slightly different ways. Audiences familiar with earlier science fiction cinema often see Oblivion as part of a long tradition of identity-focused sci-fi narratives, connected to older philosophical works in the genre. Younger audiences, especially those exposed to more franchise-driven science fiction, sometimes view it as a more self-contained and visually artistic alternative to interconnected cinematic universes. This generational divide influences how the film is discussed in online communities and film forums. Online discussions around Oblivion frequently focus on its ending and final implications. The idea that multiple versions of Jack exist and that identity can persist across clones leads to debates about what constitutes the real version of a person. Some audience interpretations emphasize emotional continuity, arguing that the version of Jack who survives with Julia is the true one because of his lived experience. Others focus on the ethical implications of artificial identity creation, questioning whether any clone can be considered genuinely autonomous. Another recurring audience interpretation centers on the film's portrayal of Earth. Some viewers see the planet as a symbol of reclaimed truth and authenticity, while others interpret it more neutrally as simply a battleground between competing forces. The contrast between the controlled sky environment and the natural surface often becomes a point of philosophical discussion among viewers interested in deeper meaning. Audience reflection also highlights the role of tone in shaping interpretation. The film's calm, almost meditative pacing leads many viewers to describe it as more atmospheric than action-oriented. This tonal approach divides opinion, but also encourages viewers to engage the film on an interpretive level rather than purely a plot-driven one. As a result, audience discussions often focus on meaning, symbolism, and emotional tone rather than only story mechanics. The character development in Oblivion is deliberately structured around gradual revelation rather than traditional transformation. Instead of characters openly changing their personalities through dialogue-heavy arcs, the film reveals that their identities, motivations, and emotional states are part of a larger constructed system. This means that character growth in the film often comes from discovery of truth rather than visible behavioral change. At the center of the film is Jack Harper, whose arc is the most complex and central to the entire narrative. At the beginning, Jack appears as a disciplined, competent technician who performs his duties with confidence and routine precision. He shows curiosity, but it is limited and contained within the boundaries of his assigned role. His early behavior reflects someone who believes completely in the system he serves, even if he experiences occasional emotional disruptions in the form of dreams and fragmented memories. Jack's development begins not as a change in personality, but as a breakdown of certainty. The recurring visions of Julia act as the first cracks in his constructed identity. These moments introduce emotional instability, but also curiosity and doubt. As he encounters real evidence that contradicts his understanding of Earth and humanity, his internal arc shifts from obedience to questioning. This transition is slow and layered, reflecting the film's emphasis on psychological awakening rather than sudden transformation. Once Jack discovers the truth about the surviving humans and the artificial nature of his mission, his arc shifts into rebellion. However, even this rebellion is not framed as a simple heroic awakening. It is more accurately a reconstruction of identity. Jack does not become someone new. Instead, he begins to uncover layers of what he already is beneath the imposed programming. His final arc resolves not in becoming a traditional hero, but in reclaiming agency over his existence and redefining what his identity means outside the system that created him. Julia Ruzakova serves as both a character and a narrative anchor for Jack's emotional development. Initially, she appears as a mysterious figure tied to Jack's fragmented memories. Her arc is less about transformation and more about revelation of connection. She represents continuity between Jack's artificial present and his human past. As the story progresses, Julia becomes the emotional center of Jack's motivation. She does not undergo a major internal transformation herself, but her presence enables Jack's emotional restoration. In this sense, her character function is stabilizing rather than evolving. Victoria Olsen represents a contrasting type of arc, one based on control and suppression. At first, she appears as Jack's partner and emotional companion within the Sky Tower. However, as the narrative unfolds, it becomes clear that her behavior is governed by systemic loyalty rather than personal emotional truth. Her development is revealed in reverse. Instead of growing into new understanding, the audience learns that her emotional responses are constrained by her role within the system. This creates a tragic dimension to her character, as her apparent stability is reinterpreted as programmed limitation. Beach, the leader of the human resistance, represents ideological conviction and survival-based pragmatism. His arc is not centered on discovery, since he already understands the truth of the world. Instead, his development lies in trust. Initially, he views Jack as a potential threat due to his origin as a clone. Over time, his perspective shifts as he recognizes Jack's capacity for independent thought and moral decision-making. Beach's arc emphasizes a theme of conditional trust in a world shaped by deception. Sykes, another member of the Resistance, begins with hostility and suspicion toward Jack. His arc follows a more traditional structure of conflict to reluctant cooperation. Unlike Beach, who is guided by leadership responsibility, Sykes operates from instinct and survival caution. His development is gradual, moving from confrontation to cautious acceptance. While not deeply complex in emotional terms, his arc reinforces the broader theme of fractured human trust in post-collapse environments. Victoria's emotional counterpart within the system, Sally, represents an entirely non-human form of character presence. As the voice of the TED intelligence system, she does not have a traditional arc. Instead, she functions as a constant authority figure whose character is defined by consistency and control. However, from a narrative perspective, her role becomes increasingly antagonistic as Jack's awareness grows. Rather than changing, she remains static, which contrasts sharply with Jack's evolving perception of her authority. The drones also serve as non-human extensions of systemic character function. They do not develop, but their role in the narrative changes depending on Jack's understanding of them. Early in the film, they are seen as protective and operational tools. Later, they are revealed as instruments of control and elimination. Their lack of development highlights the difference between programmed systems and evolving consciousness. One of the most important aspects of character development in Oblivion is that identity is not fixed, but reconstructed through information. This means that characters are defined less by consistent traits and more by shifting understanding of truth. Jack's arc is therefore not linear growth, but layered redefinition. Each revelation rewrites previous assumptions about who he is. Emotionally, the film's character arcs are restrained. Instead of overt emotional expression, characters often operate within controlled behavioral frameworks. This creates a sense of emotional distance that is gradually reduced as truth is revealed. The most significant emotional shifts occur internally rather than externally, meaning that character transformation is often communicated through implication rather than direct dialogue. The costume and set design of Oblivion are central to its storytelling, functioning not only as visual world building, but also as symbolic reinforcement of the film's themes of control, identity, and artificial order. Every design choice, from clothing materials to architectural layout, is carefully constructed to reflect a future where humanity is both technologically advanced and emotionally detached. The most iconic costume in the film is the white flight suit worn by Jack Harper and Victoria Olsen. This suit is highly minimalistic in design, featuring a clean, uniform structure with subtle functional detailing. The color white is significant, representing purity, control, and sterilized existence. It visually separates the characters from the chaotic, decayed surface of Earth, reinforcing the idea that they are operating within a controlled, artificial system above reality. The suits are also highly functional. They are designed for mobility, durability, and compatibility with advanced technology. Integrated systems within the suit allow communication, environmental protection, and interaction with machinery. Despite this technical sophistication, the suits avoid excessive visual complexity. This simplicity reinforces the film's aesthetic philosophy of minimalism and efficiency. The lack of visual clutter in the costumes mirrors the emotional restraint of the characters wearing them. Jack's suit becomes particularly symbolic as the narrative progresses. Initially, it represents professionalism and duty. Later, as Jack's identity begins to fracture, the same suit takes on a different meaning. It becomes a symbol of imposed identity, suggesting that even his appearance is part of a constructed role. When he begins to break away from the system, the suit visually contrasts with the more rugged and unstructured clothing of the Resistance, highlighting the difference between controlled existence and natural survival. Victoria's costume is nearly identical to Jack's, reinforcing the idea of uniformity and systemic equality within their roles. However, small differences in styling and posture subtly reflect her adherence to protocol and emotional restraint. The lack of individuality in their clothing design supports the idea that both characters are part of a regulated system rather than independent agents. The Resistance group introduces a stark contrast in costume design. Their clothing is practical, layered, and worn, reflecting long-term survival in harsh conditions. Earth tones dominate their wardrobe, including browns, grays, and muted greens. These colors blend with the natural environment and emphasize functionality over aesthetic perfection. Unlike the clean, structured uniforms of sky dwellers, the Resistance clothing suggests adaptability, imperfection, and lived experience. This contrast between uniformity and improvisation is one of the key visual storytelling tools in the film. It reinforces a thematic divide between artificial control and organic survival. The costumes visually communicate ideological differences without the need for explicit dialogue. Set design in Oblivion is equally deliberate and highly structured. The Sky Tower interior is one of the most visually distinctive environments in the film. It is designed with extreme minimalism, featuring large open spaces, smooth surfaces, and a dominant white color palette. The architecture emphasizes symmetry and geometric precision, with circular and curved forms appearing throughout the structure. The layout of the Sky Tower reflects a controlled lifestyle. Spaces are open but functionally restricted, giving the impression of freedom while maintaining systemic boundaries. The environment is filled with advanced technology, including holographic interfaces, floating screens, and integrated communication systems. However, these technologies are designed to be visually subtle, blending into the environment rather than dominating it. Furniture and interior objects follow the same minimalist philosophy. The circular bed, for example, is not just a design choice but a symbolic element representing repetition, cycles, and controlled existence. Its placement in the center of an open space emphasizes exposure and lack of privacy, reinforcing the idea that even personal life is structured and observed. In contrast, the surface world of Earth is defined by natural decay and environmental unpredictability. Set design in these areas emphasizes broken structures, abandoned machinery, and vast open landscapes. However, even in this destruction, there is a sense of visual composition. The ruins are not chaotic in a random sense, but arranged in a way that maintains cinematic clarity and scale. The water harvesting machines are among the most visually important set pieces. Their massive scale and industrial design dominate the landscape, emphasizing the exploitation of natural resources. Their presence in the environment creates a contrast between organic earth and artificial intervention. These structures are designed to feel both functional and oppressive, reinforcing the idea of systemic control over natural resources. The drones also function as moving set elements within the environment. Their design is smooth, spherical, and highly reflective, making them visually distinct against both the sterile sky tower and the rugged earth landscape. Their presence within scenes adds dynamic motion to otherwise static environments, reinforcing the sense of surveillance and constant monitoring. Lighting is integrated into set design as a structural element. In the sky tower, lighting is built into the architecture itself, creating seamless illumination without visible sources. This contributes to the sterile, controlled atmosphere. On Earth, lighting is natural and unpredictable, with harsh sunlight, shadows, and atmospheric diffusion shaping the environment. This contrast reinforces a duality between artificial order and natural reality. The script writing of Oblivion is built around restraint, controlled exposition, and visual storytelling rather than dense dialogue or constant verbal explanation. This approach aligns with the film's overall emphasis on atmosphere, mystery, and gradual revelation. The screenplay prioritizes structure and pacing over verbal complexity, using dialogue as a functional tool rather than the primary driver of emotion or narrative. One of the most distinctive features of the dialogue in Oblivion is its minimalism. Characters often speak in short, direct sentences that reflect the controlled environment they inhabit. Conversations are typically efficient, task-oriented, and emotionally subdued. This reflects the structured nature of the Sky Tower system, where communication is designed to maintain operational stability rather than encourage emotional expression. As a result, early dialogue exchanges between Jack and Victoria feel procedural, reinforcing the sense of routine and isolation. The script deliberately avoids excessive exposition in its early stages. Instead of explaining the world directly, it allows the audience to infer meaning through repetition, visual cues, and fragmented information. This creates a narrative experience where understanding is gradually assembled rather than immediately provided. The writing assumes that the viewer will piece together context over time, which enhances engagement but also requires patience. Jack Harper's dialogue is particularly important in establishing his character. He often expresses curiosity, mild skepticism, and reflective thoughts about his situation. However, his speech is still constrained by the system he serves. He does not initially possess the language or knowledge to fully articulate his internal conflict. This creates a subtle disconnect between what he feels and what he can express, reinforcing the theme of suppressed identity. Victoria's dialogue is even more controlled and procedural. She frequently references protocols, schedules, and system directives. Her speech pattern reflects emotional regulation and adherence to authority. The lack of emotional spontaneity in her dialogue contributes to the audience's growing sense that something is artificially structured about their environment. Even when emotional moments arise, her responses remain measured and restrained, which later gains additional meaning once her true role within the system is understood. As the narrative progresses, dialogue becomes more explanatory, especially after key revelations begin to surface. Characters such as Beach and Sykes introduce more direct informational dialogue, explaining the truth about Earth to Tet and the nature of the clones. This shift in writing style marks a transition from mystery-driven storytelling to revelation-driven storytelling. The script intentionally changes its tone to match the protagonist's evolving awareness. Beach's dialogue is particularly notable for its clarity and conviction. He speaks with certainty about the nature of the enemy and the history of human survival. His lines are structured to convey experience and authority, contrasting sharply with Jack's earlier confusion. This difference in speech style reinforces Beach's role as someone who exists outside the illusion that defines Jack's initial reality. The voice of Sally, representing the Tet system, is written with a calm, almost comforting tone that contrasts with its underlying authoritarian function. The dialogue delivered through the system is structured to sound rational, supportive, and mission-focused. This creates a psychological tension between tone and meaning, as the warmth of delivery masks the control being exerted. The writing here demonstrates how language can be used as a tool of manipulation, shaping perception through reassurance rather than force. One of the strengths of the screenplay is its use of repetition as a narrative device. Certain phrases, instructions, and behavioral patterns recur throughout the film, reinforcing the sense of routine and system control. These repetitions are not accidental, but carefully designed to emphasize the constructed nature of Jack's existence. Over time, repeated dialogue gains new meaning as the audience understands its role in maintaining psychological stability within the system. The script also uses silence and absence of dialogue as a storytelling technique. Many scenes rely entirely on visual composition and sound design, allowing the audience to absorb information without verbal explanation. This choice strengthens the immersive quality of the film and aligns with its philosophical approach to storytelling, where meaning is often communicated indirectly. Romantic and emotional dialogue between Jack and Julia is more expressive compared to other interactions in the film. Their conversations contain more emotional openness, curiosity, and vulnerability. This contrast highlights Julia's role as a catalyst for emotional awakening. Through her dialogue, Jack begins to reconnect with suppressed emotional states and fragmented memories. Their exchanges feel less controlled and more organic, reinforcing her symbolic role as a link to authentic humanity. The marketing and promotion of Oblivion were designed to position the film as a major high-concept science fiction event, while still preserving its central mystery. The promotional strategy relied heavily on visual impact, star power, and controlled information release, mirroring the film's own narrative structure of gradual revelation. Universal Pictures aimed to attract both mainstream audiences and science fiction fans by emphasizing spectacle, atmosphere, and the presence of Tom Cruise as the lead. One of the most prominent elements of the marketing campaign was the use of striking visual imagery. Posters and trailers highlighted the stark contrast between the white, sterile environments of the Sky Tower and the rugged, ruined landscapes of Earth. Tom Cruise was consistently featured in a futuristic flight suit, often standing alone in vast environments. This imagery reinforced themes of isolation, survival, and futuristic exploration, while also making the film visually distinctive in promotional materials. The trailers were carefully constructed to avoid revealing major plot twists. Instead of explaining the full narrative, they focus on mood, world building, and action sequences. Early promotional footage emphasized drone encounters, aerial flight scenes, and the mysterious nature of the post-apocalyptic Earth. The marketing deliberately withheld the central identity twist, ensuring that audiences would experience the story's revelations in theaters rather than in advance through promotional material. The tone of the trailers was heavily atmospheric, using slow-building music, minimal dialogue, and extended visual shots. This approach differentiated Oblivion from more conventional action film marketing, which often relies on rapid cuts and explicit plot summaries. Instead, the promotional material mirrored the film's pacing and aesthetic, appealing to audiences interested in immersive and visually driven science fiction. Tom Cruise's involvement was a key marketing asset. As one of the most recognizable global film stars, his presence helped position Oblivion as a major theatrical event. Marketing campaigns emphasized his role as a lone operative on a desolate Earth, tapping into his established screen persona as a capable, resourceful protagonist in high-stakes environments. His reputation for performing physically demanding roles also contributed to perception of authenticity in the film's action sequences. Olga Kurylenko and Morgan Freeman were also featured in promotional materials, though in a more limited capacity. Their presence helped broaden the appeal of the film, signaling both emotional depth and narrative complexity. Morgan Freeman's inclusion, in particular, added a sense of authority and seriousness to the project, as he is often associated with roles that convey wisdom or resistance leadership. The promotional campaign also made strong use of the film's visual effects as a selling point. Drone designs, futuristic aircraft, and expansive landscapes were prominently showcased. These elements were intended to communicate the scale and technological ambition of the film. Visual effects studios involved in production were occasionally highlighted in industry-focused marketing materials, reinforcing the film's technical achievements. Another important aspect of the marketing strategy was its focus on mystery. The official synopsis was intentionally vague, describing Jack Harper as a technician on a ruined Earth without revealing the deeper narrative structure involving cloning and artificial intelligence. This ambiguity was designed to encourage curiosity and speculation, drawing audiences into theaters to uncover the full story. International marketing played a significant role in the film's release strategy. Promotion materials were adapted for different global markets, often emphasizing action and visual spectacle over philosophical themes. This reflected the film's reliance on international box office performance, as science fiction films with strong visual identity tend to perform well across language barriers. The imagery of a lone human figure against vast futuristic landscapes proved effective in global advertising campaigns. Television spots and online trailers were released in multiple phases, gradually increasing narrative hints as the release date approached. Early marketing focused almost entirely on atmosphere and world building, while later promotions included more action-oriented sequences. This layered approach helped maintain audience interest over time, while still preserving key story elements. The film also benefited from cross-platform digital promotion, including behind-the-scenes featurettes and interviews with the cast and crew. These materials highlighted the production process, filming in Iceland, and the integration of practical and digital effects. This behind-the-scenes content helped reinforce the film's sense of realism and technical craftsmanship. Despite its strong visual marketing, Oblivion did not rely heavily on viral marketing campaigns or interactive online storytelling, which were becoming more common for science fiction films during the early 2010s. Instead, it maintained a more traditional promotional approach centered on trailers, posters, interviews, and theatrical advertising. The marketing campaign successfully positioned Oblivion as a visually ambitious, emotionally atmospheric science fiction film led by a major movie star. However, by carefully withholding narrative complexity, it also created expectations that were primarily visual and action-oriented. This mismatch between marketing emphasis and narrative structure contributed to the varied audience reactions upon release. Oblivion can be better understood when placed alongside other science fiction films that explore similar themes of identity, memory, artificial intelligence, and simulated reality. While it is not an isolated work, its unique contribution becomes clearer through comparison with earlier influences and contemporaneous films that shape the same cinematic landscape. One of the most direct points of comparison is with earlier science fiction narratives that explore reality manipulation and identity uncertainty. Films such as The Matrix and Dark City establish foundational ideas about controlled environments, constructed realities, and human perception being shaped by external systems. Oblivion shares thematic DNA with these works, particularly in its portrayal of a hidden controlling intelligence and a protagonist whose understanding of reality is gradually dismantled. However, unlike The Matrix, which emphasizes philosophical rebellion and stylistic intensity, Oblivion adopts a more restrained and atmospheric approach. Its focus is less on philosophical exposition and more on emotional discovery through visual storytelling. Another useful comparison is with Moon, a science fiction film centered on cloning and identity repetition. Both films explore the concept of human duplication and the psychological consequences of discovering that one's existence is manufactured. Moon is more intimate and introspective, focusing on a single isolated character in a confined environment, while Oblivion expands the scale dramatically, placing similar existential questions within a large, visually expansive world. Oblivion externalizes its philosophical themes through landscapes and systems, whereas Moon internalizes them through solitude and dialogue. Prometheus also offers a relevant comparison, particularly in terms of visual ambition and thematic mystery. Both films feature protagonists exploring unknown truths within highly controlled or engineered environments. They share a slow reveal structure and a focus on humanity's place within larger artificial or alien systems. However, Prometheus leans more heavily into mythological and cosmic questions, while Oblivion remains grounded in a more personal narrative of identity and emotional recovery. Where Prometheus raises questions about origin and creation on a cosmic scale, Oblivion narrows its focus to individual identity within a controlled system. Within Tom Cruise's own filmography, Oblivion can be compared to Minority Report and War of the Worlds. All three films explore themes of surveillance, control systems, and human agency under technological dominance. Minority Report focuses on predictive systems and preemptive justice, while War of the Worlds deals with survival during an alien invasion. Oblivion combines elements of both, blending surveillance-driven control with post-apocalyptic survival. However, Oblivion is more introspective and visually minimal compared to the kinetic intensity of Cruise's earlier science fiction work. In comparison to Edge of Tomorrow, another science fiction film starring Tom Cruise, released shortly after, Oblivion feels more meditative and less structurally complex in terms of narrative mechanics. Edge of Tomorrow uses repetition and time loops as a core storytelling device, creating a fast-paced, action-oriented experience. Oblivion, on the other hand, uses repetition as a thematic tool to emphasize routine and psychological conditioning rather than narrative acceleration. Both films explore identity transformation, but through very different structural approaches. When compared to contemporary blockbuster science fiction films of the early 2010s, such as Elysium and Pacific Rim, Oblivion stands out for its restraint and visual minimalism. Elysium shares similar themes of societal division and technological inequality, but expresses them through more direct political allegory and action-driven storytelling. Pacific Rim prioritizes spectacle and kinetic energy, focusing on large-scale conflict and visual intensity. Oblivion occupies a quieter space, prioritizing atmosphere, controlled pacing, and philosophical undertones over constant action. From a stylistic perspective, Oblivion can also be compared to Blade Runner and its later sequel Blade Runner 2049. These films share a strong emphasis on visual atmosphere, existential questioning, and artificial identity. However, Blade Runner is more focused on noir aesthetics, urban decay, and philosophical ambiguity, while Oblivion presents a cleaner, more geometric vision of futurism. Where Blade Runner embraces darkness and complexity, Oblivion leans toward clarity, symmetry, and controlled visual order. In terms of narrative structure, Oblivion follows a more classical three-act revelation model, compared to more fragmented or experimental science fiction films. Its storytelling is linear and progressively revealing, whereas films like Inception or Arrival use more complex temporal or linguistic structures to challenge audience perception. Oblivion remains accessible in its narrative clarity, even while dealing with abstract philosophical ideas.